Tonight, you're not a person trying to get one more thing done. You're a small patch of shade, and the world is doing that quiet thing it does when it thinks nobody is watching. Before you fall asleep, you'll walk with a young prince into the rude, white noon north of Memphis. You'll watch how Egyptians let power travel through bargains between gods, kings, and maintenance work, and you'll see how a tiny, ordinary choice sitting down for a minute can turn into a throne with a very long echo. Wind combing dunes, stone-breathing dust and sun, a boy's shadow flickering across a buried lion's face. Something nearby keeps time, the soft, stubborn hiss of sand moving where it shouldn't, slow and obedient. And if your breathing starts to follow it, that's perfect. Inhale 4, exhale 6. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, maybe the wind will tap that same answer against the dunes and remember you there. Because tonight's story doesn't begin with a coronation or a parade or a historian's confident voice. It begins with a Napa hot, accidental surrender to shade beside a face that has been waiting under sand long enough to learn patience. So let the room stay still. Let your eyes soften into that gentle half-focus where details feel like they're floating. Somewhere far away, the desert is rearranging itself one grain at a time, the way a careful hand smooths a blanket without waking anyone. Noon is at its loudest, but it's a dry loudness, the kind that presses rather than shouts. Heat erases edges, distance becomes pale, the horizon starts acting shy. And out there, half made into a rumor by drifting dunes, the Sphinx holds its posture severe, quiet, and slightly inconvenienced. Not dramatic, not mystical in the fireworks sense, just present like a monument that has been forced to share a room with time. All that's left is for someone young, overheated, and briefly ordinary to step down from a chariot, walk until the world goes empty around him, and choose the simplest solution a body knows. Stop, sit, and let sleep arrive. You might not expect a career to begin with a nap, but Egypt was occasionally practical like that. Sometimes a prophecy came with trumpets, yes, but sometimes it arrived as a face half buried in sand, quietly irritated, waiting for someone young and overheated to sit down in the shade and stop talking for a moment. And if your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the air in your space feel like it has decided to be helpful. Let your eyes do whatever they want. Let them soften or close or hover somewhere in between, like a door that doesn't need to slam to be shut. Somewhere far away, the desert is doing its slow work, combing dunes again and again, the way a patient hand smooths a blanket without making a fuss about it. So picture the midday heat north of Memphis, not as something dramatic, but as something slightly rude. It presses on the shoulders. It erases edges. It turns distant things into pale suggestions, as if the horizon is embarrassed to be seen. A young Prince Thutmose, not yet wearing the weighty name, the fourth, like a necklace, has been hunting, or at least doing that real activity where you ride out, look serious, and let other people handle most of the actual effort. There's a chariot. There are horses that are doing their best. There's dust that clings to everything as if it has signed a long-term lease. And the prince is out of breath in that very human way, the way someone becomes ordinary. The moment the sun decides to lean closer, he steps down. He walks not far, just enough for the sound of the chariot to fade behind him, just enough for the world to feel wide and empty and quiet. The dunes are moving in tiny, invisible increments, and the wind is making soft lines in the sand like a comb through hair. Then half buried, sunk to the chest, like a lion that has been politely asked to lie down and wait, there is the Sphinx. Or rather, there is a version of the Sphinx that looks as though it has been forgotten by the universe as cleaning schedule. The great face is there, still severe, still watchful, but the body is swallowed up, pinned by years of drifting sand, the way a statue can be pinned by time. The eyes narrow in the glare, not because it's angry, but because it's bright. The nose, already a rumor in later centuries, is simply there in this moment, surrounded by heat, shimmer, and quiet. The prince finds the shade near the paw, a crescent of slightly cooler air. It's not deep shade. It's the kind of shade that still feels warm, like a cup that used to hold tea, but it is enough. He sits, he leans back against stone that has baked all morning. And because the body is wise and practical, because the body knows what a person refuses to admit, sleep arrives anyway, slowly, gently like a cold jug tipped in careful increments. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. The roar of flies becomes a kind of surf. The buzzing turns rhythmic, almost organized, as if even the insects have agreed to lower their voices near a sacred monument. The stone breathes dust and sun, and somewhere between the hot world and the cooler pocket behind the eyelids, the Sphinx begins to speak in a human voice, which is, frankly, a little unexpected for a lion. But the voice is not booming. There is no thunder, no dramatic music, no celestial spotlight. It's a voice that sounds like warmed limestone and patience. The sort of voice that has been waiting so long, it has learned not to waste syllables. It tells him a name Harmachis, Hormaket, Horus in the horizon, because Egypt loved a good title, and also loved to be precise about which version of a god you meant, like addressing an email to the correct department. And the face says, in the plain language of someone who is tired of being buried, that it is choking on desert, that it cannot breathe properly, that it wants the sand cleared away. And in exchange, because even divine beings sometimes prefer agreements that can be summarized, there will be help. There will be a throne. There will be a name that lasts. It's delivered like a contract, not a romance. Labor now, reign later. Dig me out, and I will dig your future out. It's the soft, oddly practical magic of Egypt. The universe responds to maintenance. The cosmos likes someone who keeps the temple lamps trimmed and the offering tables tidy. The prince, inside the dream, nods. Not dramatically. Just a small gesture, the kind you do when you're agreeing to terms you understand in your bones, even if your conscious mind is busy being asleep. And the dream does that Egyptian thing where a promise becomes a physical object. It becomes a sentence that won't leave. A phrase that sits in the mouth like sand, slightly gritty, impossible to ignore. He wakes with grains on his tongue, the taste of the plateau, and the feeling that something very old has just handed him a task list. He doesn't leap up in excitement. He blinks. He swallows. He looks at the Sphinx again, still half buried, still quiet, still watching. It's almost funny, in a dry way, how enormous destiny can feel and how small a person looks beside a stone lion. It's also a little funny that Egypt, a civilization that could carve mountains and organize fleets of barges, chose to deliver a royal career through the simplest human vulnerability, being tired. If you can be defeated by noon, you can apparently also be promoted by it. And of course, the first step in paying a dream debt is not a hymn. It's logistics. It's waking up tomorrow and finding people with hands in baskets. So at dawn, when the air on the plateau is almost kind, when the heat hasn't fully clocked in for its shift teams arrive. You can imagine the sound of sandals on hard ground, the light scuff of woven solace. You can imagine reed baskets, simple and practical, the kind that hold grain or figs, now recruited to hold sand and nothing but sand. Each basket is a unit of progress. Each load is a syllable in a sentence the desert has been writing for centuries. And now, slowly, the sentence begins to be erased. The overseer counts in handfuls, not in hours. Progress is measured as knuckles of stone are revealed, a curve of paw, a buried line that becomes a shadow again. The work is quiet in that way that real work often is steady, repetitive, almost meditative. Sand is lifted. Sand is carried. Sand is poured out somewhere else, where it will immediately begin planning its return. Priests come too, because in Egypt you didn't only move materials, you moved meanings. They sprinkle water, not to bless the sand exactly, but to make it behave. Water in the desert is persuasion. It tells the grains to hold a shape, to stop sliding away, to become briefly cooperative. It's the same idea as smoothing a bedsheet. You are not changing the world, you are just making it lie flatter. The Sphinx's face brightens by degrees, as if waking. There is a moment when the mouth looks less like a myth and more like a sculpture again. A mouth that could speak, a mouth that could bargain. And the wind, always a participant on that plateau, seems to forget, for a moment, to be difficult. It pauses, distracted, as though even the breeze is curious to see what's under all that sand. The prince's dream sits nearby like a folded piece of cloth. He doesn't carry it openly. He carries it inside his ribs, behind the breath. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Work can follow breathing. Work can be a kind of prayer when you repeat it long enough. And because Egypt liked to fix stories in place, because it preferred memory that could be read aloud, there is a second part to the bargain, writing it down. A single slab of red granite is set between the paws, like a bookmark inserted into the monument itself. Granite is not subtle. Granite is what you use when you plan on being taken seriously by time. Words are carved steadily, with that careful rhythm of chisels, the slow tapping that makes even speech sound sleepy. The text tells the story in the tidy grammar of gratitude. A prince, a shade, a pledge, a throne. It says the god requested clearing. It says the prince obeyed. It says the god rewarded. It's a neat arrangement, like labeling jars in a pantry. Whoever doubts can read. Whoever reads will picture the digging whether they want to or not. The mind is funny that way. It will obediently imagine baskets of sand just because a stone told it to. And there's something gently amusing about an ancient miracle that comes with a plaque. Not because it cheapens it, because it feels familiar. Humans still do this. We still put up signs that say a thing happened here, as if the universe might forget without our help. The Egyptians simply did it with more confidence and with better stone. They also did it with the understanding that names matter, that if you name a god correctly, you can speak to it, that if you name a king correctly, you can keep him stitched into memory. Somewhere nearby on someone's wrist or around someone's neck, a small amulet might sit an eye of Horus, perhaps meant for wholeness, for protection, for the body staying together. It's the same impulse as the Sila, keep things intact, keep things from spilling. As the Sphinx is freed, the story begins to travel ahead of the prince, because stories are lighter than sand and much faster. Messengers carry it. Priests repeat it. Scribes unroll it in careful phrases. The face spoke, they say, as if that is a normal sentence to write. And in court, where silence can be sharper than any weapon, but still doesn't need to be loud about it, people listen. Older brothers, because royal families are full of brothers, and brothers come with complications, fade into polite quiet, the way candle smoke fades when someone opens a door. The oracle's edge, if you can call it that, cuts cleaner than gossip. It's not a dramatic cut. It's a tidy one, like trimming a thread. In Egypt, the crown was not one thing, it was two. It was the red crown of the north and the white crown of the south. Two shapes with two histories, worn together as if the head itself could unify geography. The idea of uniting is, in a sleepy way, just another kind of tying. You take separate threads and knot them. And now the dream is retold as policy. A land rewards care with continuity. A god rewards maintenance with legitimacy. The coronation, when it comes, does not feel like fireworks. It feels like copper and stone measured, inevitable, already rehearsed in the rhythm of ritual. Feet step where feet have stepped before. Words are spoken that have been spoken before. The universe, if it approves, does so by continuing to function normally, which is honestly the most relaxing kind of approval. And if you imagine Thutmose now a king, he does not become a different species. He becomes a person with heavier jewelry. He becomes someone whose day includes petitions, reports, temple schedules, and the occasional ceremonial act that looks dramatic from far away but feels up close, like standing still for a long time while someone adjusts your clothing. Somewhere, a priest is always counting something. Offerings, days, decans, festival intervals. Egypt loved calendars. It loved the idea that time could be arranged like bread loaves on a tray. Even the stars were organized into decans, neat little groups that rose on schedule like shift workers. And in the background of that organized time sits a stone lion who once asked for help in the most human way possible. I can breathe. Please move this. The bargain must be kept, which means the work must continue even after the dream has paid out. Incense climbs the lion's cheek in thin, sleepy spirals. Beer cools in shade because beer was not a party trick in Egypt. It was a food group, and also a helpful offering when you wanted the divine to feel included. Wreaths are placed where the sun bites hardest, little circles of plant matter trying their best to negotiate with light. Priests assign teams not only for grand ceremonies, but for cyclical clearing, because dunes creep back the way dust creeps onto shelves, quietly, inevitably, without malice. A god is like a canal. Someone once says maintain it, or you borrow trouble from next year. This is not threatening. It's simply the tone of a civilization that knew exactly what happens when you stop cleaning. There's a gentle irony here too. Kings are remembered for battles, for buildings, for proclamations. But sometimes a king is remembered for a maintenance plan, for appointing people to keep sand from swallowing a monument. That's a very Egyptian sort of greatness. Not always thunder, sometimes just the steady refusal to let things fall apart. You can almost imagine the paperwork. Yes, even then, a form of paperwork lists of workers. Baskets counted, grain allotted, water brought, tools sharpened, magic quietly, like a ledger. A miracle, in Egypt, could be supported by a schedule. If the god asked for breathing space could be provided in shifts. And over time, the signs that the promise held are not meteor showers. They are ordinary changes that feel subtly less random. Roads to Memphis thicken. Estates change hands the way estates do when a rain settles into place. Scribes get busier at the edges of maps, drawing, labeling, filing the world into categories. A throne room feels less like chance and more like a room with locks that work. Visitors come to the plateau, and when they read the stela, they lower their voices without being told why. Something about a story carved into stone asks for softness. Even people who do not believe in the Sphinx speaking still believe in quiet, when quiet is demanded by weight and age and sun. The Sphinx stays awake through the rain in its own manner of staying awake, sometimes dusty, never drowned, always watched. The face is freed, the paws are clear, and yet the desert never stops trying to reclaim its favorite sculpture. That's the relationship, not a victory, not a defeat, an ongoing negotiation. You could call it a bargain that never fully ends. The wind lifts a little sand each day. The caretakers brush it away. The world continues. And somewhere inside that slow cycle, the original nap remains like a hidden room in the story. The moment when a boy, as shadow flickered across a buried lioness face and the universe decided to answer with a contract. If you like, you can keep a few facts in one jar, small and labeled, sleep, vow, dig, stela, and keep a few thoughts away in another jar, equally small, equally labeled, hurry, drama, the need to know what happens next. Because this is the kind of tale that doesn't want to sprint. It wants to walk barefoot on warm stone, slow enough to feel the texture. If a task looks impossible, measure it in baskets, not years. Measure it in handfuls. Agree with the sun to meet at dawn, when the world is quieter and your mind is softer. Pay promises as maintenance, not as miracles. Let receipts be stone and ritual rather than talk. Let the idea of destiny be less like a trumpet blast and more like a list you calmly return to, one item at a time. And as the desert keeps breathing stone, breathing dust and sun, wind combing dunes and steady strokes, you can let your own breathing stay simple. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. The dune exhales. The lion blinks in the mind's eye, slow and calm, not in a hurry to prove anything. The prince turned king breathes evenly somewhere inside the story, and Egypt sleeps in its own wide, warm way, with temples tending their lamps, with scribes tending their lines, with sand tending its slow return, and with a bargain that doesn't need an ending because it can always be checked, always be maintained, always be renewed the next quiet morning, when the air is cool enough to begin again. In Egypt, even a god could sound a little tired when the sand got into everything. That's one of the strangely comforting ideas tucked inside this story. The divine isn't always lightning. Sometimes it's a very old face in a very bright place, speaking like someone who has been politely choking for a few centuries and is finally ready to file a complaint. And because you're half asleep already, it is easy to imagine the complaint arriving in the gentlest way through a dream that feels warm at the edges, and practical in the middle like a message written on linen and folded neatly into your hand. The voice comes from the stone, the way warmth comes from a sunlit wall. It doesn't rush. It doesn't try to impress you. It simply begins as if it has been speaking this entire time and you've only just learned how to listen. It gives a name, slowly, clearly Harmachus, Hor-Em Akhet, Horus in the horizon, because Egypt loved precision the way a baker loves measuring cups. A god's name was not just a label. It was a handle. It was the part you could hold without getting burned. And for a sleepy boy with sand on his cheeks, a name is also reassurance. If it has a name, then it has rules. If it has rules, it can be dealt with. Even if the thing speaking is the largest lion you've ever not seen fully, half buried like a thought you keep forgetting, it still begins by telling you what to call it. Then it explains the problem with a blunt softness that is almost funny. I choke on desert, it says, or something like that, because the dream translates divine speech into a sentence you can understand. The Sphinx is not being poetic on purpose. It's being accurate. Sand is everywhere, between stone and air, in the corners of carved lines, in the mouth of time. It piles up the way dust piles up in a room you swear you cleaned yesterday. The face does not ask for worship first. It asks for maintenance. Not a parade, not a speech, just breathing space. Free me, it says, and I will free your name. And that's when the dream begins to feel like a contract, which is a strangely calming thing for a myth. No thunder accompanies it, no dramatic choir. Just a bargain phrase the way someone might offer you a deal over a low table. Labor now, throne later. Egypt was full of bargains like this, only usually smaller. You pour beer, you offer bread, you light incense. In return, you get a good flood, or a safe birth, or a dream that doesn't feel sharp at the edges. This is the same pattern, only scaled up until it becomes political. The god does not promise a personality makeover. It does not promise that life will be easy. It promises legitimacy, which is the ancient equivalent of being verified, except with more sandals. The boy Thutmose, still a prince, still warm and dusty and out of breath, does not answer with grand words. He nods. In the dream, that nod matters. It counts. And that detail has always felt very Egyptian to me. A small gesture can be filed by the universe as real. The gods are listening, but they are also accounting. They notice the little things. They notice whether you speak clearly, whether you keep the lamp trimmed, whether you show up on time for your own life. A nod is accepted as signature. It's not romantic, it's efficient. Somewhere behind the god's voice, the desert continues its hush. The flies are still there, performing their tiny, irritating choir. but the sound is rounded now, like surf on a far shore. The heat is still pressed over everything, but in the dream it becomes a blanket rather than a weight. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. The breath makes the bargain feel even steadier, like tying a knot and pulling it gently tight. And the god, as if noticing your breathing, almost matches it. A phrase arrives, then a pause. Another phrase, then a pause. It's a conversation paced for sleep. It also gets oddly specific, the way Egyptian religion loved to get oddly specific. The god doesn't say, be good. It doesn't say, be brave. It says, in essence, clear the sand from my chest and pause. Make my face visible. Keep it that way. It's as if the divine has learned that vague requests lead to disappointing outcomes. You can almost picture a priest as somewhere in the universe, nodding approvingly at the clarity. This is a measurable task. This is something you can assign teams to. This is something you can count in baskets, a miracle you can track. And because names matter, the god's promise is shaped around a name too. Not simply, you will be king, but your name will be freed. That's a different kind of reward. In Egypt, your name wasn't just what people called you when they wanted you to turn around. It was a part of your survival. A name was something you needed preserved, spoken, written, carved, repeated, so you could continue being you. A person without a name was a person dissolving. That is why names show up everywhere in tombs, on statues, along temple walls like stitches. The Egyptians stitched their identities into stone because they didn't trust time to be gentle. So when the god promises to free your name, it's offering more than a throne. It's offering continuity. It's offering the kind of permanence that makes a human life feel less like a brief candle. And there's a soft irony in that too, because the request is also about freeing a face. Free my face from sand, the god says, and I will free your name from being swallowed by politics, by older brothers, by the quiet machinery of court. It's symmetrical, like good design. Egypt loved symmetry, even its chaos had patterns. The bargain sits there in the dream like a small stone placed on your chest present, not heavy, just undeniable. The boy's mind, sleepy and warm, accepts it the way you accept the fact that you have to charge your phone eventually. Not dramatic, just true. And the god's voice, satisfied with the agreement, becomes less like a proclamation and more like instructions offered to someone who might forget. It repeats itself in slightly different phrasing, the way you repeat directions to yourself when you don't want to get lost. This is how myths are built, not through shouting, but through remembering. There is also that peculiarly Egyptian feeling that the dream is not only between you and the god, it's between you and the world. Heka magic, the force that makes words do something, is present without making a scene. In Egypt, magic wasn't always a spooky special effect. It was often just the idea that language is functional, that a spoken phrase can oil a hinge, that a carved line can keep a door open, that a name can close a wound. If you've ever felt soothed by repeating the same sentence to yourself when you can to sleep, you already understand the basic principle. The Egyptians just took that feeling and built temples around it. You can imagine the temple librarians of the divine world taking notes as the dream happens. Not because they need to, but because Egypt loved records. Lists of offerings, lists of festivals, lists of gods with their titles, like a polite directory. Even the underworld had directories, gatekeepers with names, doors with names, hours with names, because naming something made it navigable. And here is a dream being named into existence. Harmachis speaks. Thutmose agrees. Terms are set. The universe, pleased with the paperwork, allows the story to proceed. When the boy wakes later, the sand tastes like the end of a sentence. It lingers. It's gritty, and not in a heroic way, more in a you should drink water way. His mouth is dry. His eyes blink against the glare. But the sentence the god put into him stays. That part is important. The dream doesn't dissolve. It sticks. It becomes a thought you can't swipe away. That's how Egypt treats vows. They're not dramatic declarations made under moonlight. They're small, persistent things that follow you, like a smell of incense in your hair after leaving a shrine. And in the days after, the prince carries the dream like a secret organizer in his chest. He doesn't necessarily talk about it the way you might not talk about a strange, vivid dream at breakfast because it sounds silly out loud. A giant half-buried lion talked to me and offered a career advancement plan is not an easy sentence to deliver with a straight face, even in a world that fully believes stone can talk. So he does the more Egyptian thing. He acts. He turns the dream into ritual. He turns the bargain into work. Even before the digging begins, you can picture small preparations. Someone gathering tools, someone repairing baskets, someone fetching water skins and counting them like precious coins. Someone choosing a day that feels auspicious, because Egypt loved a calendar and also loved the feeling that time had personality. Each day could be lucky or stubborn, friendly or complicated. There were days when you didn't travel, days when you didn't start new projects, days when you absolutely did not argue with anyone if you could help it. There were also days when the stars rose in a certain configuration and the priests nodded as if the sky had signed off. If you've ever tried to start a task while you're tired, you know the gentle comedy of planning. Tomorrow, you say, as if tomorrow is a guaranteed resource. The Egyptians did this too, but with better tracking. Tomorrow was the 3rd month of Shemu, day X, and it came with notes. And the dream, sitting in Thutmose's mind, probably feels like that kind of note, not mystical smoke. More like a reminder, do this, or the sand returns. Do this, or your name remains trapped in competing claims. Do this, because the god asked with an unusually personal honesty, I can't breathe. It's also worth noticing how polite the dream is. The god doesn't threaten him. It doesn't say, do this or else. It doesn't need to. In Egypt, or else, was often implied by the natural world. If you don't repair the canal, the water doesn't reach the field. If you don't offer at the shrine, you're not aligning yourself with Mat, the principle of right order, and life gets messier. Not as punishment necessarily, but as consequence. The cosmos, in their view, was a system that liked maintenance. The god's bargain taps into that sleepy, steady logic. Keep me clear. Keep your future clear. That's all. There is, however, a slight sharpness hidden in the dream's calmness, like a pin tucked into fabric. The story includes older brothers, court talk, the usual royal complications. And yet the dream refuses to become dramatic about it. It doesn't fan the tension. It simply acknowledges it the way you acknowledge the weather. Politics exists, it says, without saying it. Names can be swallowed, it says, without raising its voice. The dream offers an alternative route, quietly. A detour through the plateau. A bargain made in shade at noon. Egypt loved detours through the sacred. Sometimes the shortest path to power was not through argument, but through being seen by a god. And the god, being ancient and slightly irritated, chooses a wonderfully unglamorous way to be seen, as a face half drowned in sand. It's hard to pretend you read too important for a task when the task is literally shoveling. There's something humbling about it, almost soothing. The dream isn't asking the prince to win anything. It's asking him to clear, to dig, to keep, to return year after year and make sure the desert hasn't undone the kindness. If you can do that, then perhaps you can wear a crown without it swallowing you. There's a modern comparison here, quiet enough not to wake you. It is like being promised something big in exchange for doing something boring consistently. It's like being told, yes, you can have the future you want, but you have to keep your password safe and update your software and drink water. Not thrilling, just reliable. Egypt's myths, at their sleepiest, are full of this kind of steady advice folded into divine imagery. A god speaks, and what it really says is, show up, Maintain. Don't let the sand win by default. The dream's final gift is not a grand prophecy. It's a sense of direction. It points his attention toward that buried face and makes the Sphinx feel less like a monument and more like a person and an ancient one. Yes, but still someone with needs. It's almost intimate in a dusty way. A face asking for breath, a boy nodding. A bargain set in the simplest human language. Help me and I will help you. And as your own breath stays slow, inhale 4, exhale 6, you can let that simplicity settle too. Contracts are calming. Clear terms are calming. Even the idea of a stone lion speaking can be calming if it speaks softly and doesn't demand that you stay awake to hear it. And maybe that's the secret reason this story has lasted for so long. Not because it's loud, but because it's strangely gentle. A life turning point delivered as a nap. A god's request delivered as maintenance. A throne delivered as a name kept safe. No fire, no chase. Just sand, shade, and a voice that sounds like warm stone, reminding you that even the oldest things need a little room to breathe. And in the hush after the dream's terms are set, the heat keeps humming. The flies keep their small waves of sound, and the Sphinx harmicus, Horus in the horizon, stays very still, as if staying still is also part of the agreement, as if the story can continue on and on, in the same slow rhythm, so long as someone remembers to come back at dawn with baskets and patience, and the quiet willingness to keep clearing what inevitably returns. It's strangely soothing to remember that in Egypt, even the most sacred moments could involve baskets. Not golden baskets, not dramatic baskets, just the everyday kind made from reeds that smell faintly of river water and hands. A god can speak in a dream, yes, and promise a future like a signed document. But the next step is often someone quietly saying, in the morning light, "All right then, bring the baskets." And somehow that's the calm magic of it. A prophecy can float like incense, but the follow-through comes in neat physical scoops. So dawn arrives the way it always does on the plateau, not as a grand entrance, but as a careful change in temperature. The sand that burned yesterday becomes cool enough to touch without flinching. The air tastes slightly cleaner, as if it has rinsed its mouth overnight. And teams begin to appear from the edge of the world with their reed baskets nested together like sleeping animals. You can hear the soft scrape as they separate them one by one, like pages being turned. It's gentle work, and it starts gently, because every big task in Egypt liked to pretend it was only a small task repeated politely. Someone is assigned to count, of course. Egypt adored counting. Not in a frantic way, more in a comforting way, like counting sheep, but with better handwriting. The overseer doesn't measure progress in hours. Hours are too slippery. He measures in handfuls, in baskets, and the honest weight of sand moved from one place to another. He might mark tallies on a shard of pottery, or mutter numbers under his breath, like a prayer that happens to be practical. Counting makes the impossible feel domesticated. A buried god becomes a project. A dream becomes something you can budget. The first scoops are small. They always are. Each basket lifted feels like a syllable added to a sentence that will take months to finish. Sand pours with a soft hiss, like a very calm secret being told to the ground. Men step carefully, not because anyone is afraid, but because you don't hurry around something sacred. You don't sprint near a god's nose, even if the nose is currently, inconveniently, a rumor under a dune. Even the jokes stay quiet. A worker might whisper that the Sphinx is the only creature in Egypt that can get buried while lying down, which is, to be fair, a remarkable talent. Someone might answer that the desert is simply tucking him in again, which is almost sweet if you ignore the part where everyone is sweating. And the prince Thutmose, still carrying the dreams, sentence like sand in his mouth, moves through this early work with a focus that feels oddly adult. He isn't barking orders like a hero. He's watching the rhythm. He's learning the pace of maintenance, because the bargain wasn't about one dramatic rescue. It was about keeping a face clear and keeping it clear again and again. The way you keep a lamp from going out by trimming the wick before it complains. There's a priest nearby because there always is. In Egypt, if you do anything significant, a priest appears as naturally as a shadow. The priest doesn't interfere much. He isn't here to turn digging into theater. He's here to keep the action aligned with mat right order, the invisible straightness and how things should be. He carries a small jar of water that looks ordinary until you remember that in this world, words can be poured into water. He sprinkles the sand in front of a pick, not to bless the laborers personally, but to make the sand behave. Dry sand is clever. It slides back into the hole the moment you look away. Damp sand, on the other hand, will hold an edge, like a well-trained thought. The water darkens the ground in small patches, and the work becomes tidier. The sand stops acting like it has its own opinions. It clumps, it obeys. There's a gentle irony here. You don't defeat the desert. You persuade it to cooperate, one damp handful at a time. This is how Egyptian religion worked too. It wasn't always about conquest. It was about keeping the universe from slipping out of alignment with small, repeated gestures that might look boring to anyone who expects fireworks. Egypt was not addicted to fireworks. Egypt was addicted to continuity. As the baskets fill and empty, the Sphinx's presence begins to shift from an idea to a contour. A slope becomes a curve. A curve becomes the suggestion of a paw. The paw, not yet fully visible, but beginning to be remembered by the light, feels like the first proof that a dream can leave a mark on the daytime world. Workers pause occasionally, not out of drama, but out of that reverent curiosity you feel when you uncover something that has been waiting longer than your entire family line. A few grains sparkle where they fall, catching the sun briefly, then forgetting it. And the flies, because they are loyal to the concept of being annoying, continue their patient orbit. They are the one choir in Egypt that never takes a day off. Their sound becomes part of the rhythm, almost soothing if you stop resisting it, like a white noise machine with a very small attitude. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. The breath is not only for calm, it's for measurement. It gives you a steady unit that doesn't depend on mood. The priestess did this too, counting, reciting, repeating, because steady rhythm makes reality less slippery. Somewhere in the background, someone mentions the calendar. They always do. We must do this before the festival, someone says, or we must do this on a clean day, as if time itself needs to be washed. Egypt divided the year into seasons that matched the Nile's behavior flood. Growing, harvest, and even out here on the drier plateau, the mindset follows. They will time the clearing, they will assign rituals to dates, they will pin the work down so it cannot drift into neglect. The story will not just live in mouths, it will live in schedules. And then comes the steady part of the work, the part that is almost hypnotic. Scoop, lift, step, pour, return. Scoop, lift, step, pour, return. If you watch long enough, you start to see the project not as a single act, but as a living pattern. Baskets move like slow waves. Men trade places without fuss. Tools are passed hand to hand. Someone adjusts a headcloth. Someone scratches an itch and immediately regrets it because now their fingers have sand on them again. Nothing heroic, just human. And that, in an odd way, is what makes the myth cozy. A god is being rescued by the most boring miracle of all, sustained effort. You can almost hear the Sphinx in your imagination, not speaking loudly now, but simply breathing a little easier as the sand drops away from his chest. The idea of a stone creature breathing is ridiculous, of course, and Egypt was happy to hold ridiculous ideas gently. Stone breath, stone speech, stone memory. Maybe it isn't literal. Maybe it's the universe's way of saying, what is buried can return. And the return can be as slow and slanted as the morning sun creeping across limestone. As more of the statue emerges, small details start to matter in a very Egyptian way. The angle of a line, the smoothness of a surface. Egypt loved surfaces that looked finished. A rough edge felt like disorder. So even while digging, they fuss a little. Someone smooths a newly exposed curve with the flat of a hand, as if petting a cat that might accept the gesture if you do it respectfully. Another worker brushes grit from a groove, and for a second, the carved shape catches light like a newly spoken word. The prince watches this, and he learns another subtle lesson. The god isn't just being uncovered. He's being reintroduced. There's a difference. Uncovering is physical. Reintroduction is social. A monument is not fully alive again until people start behaving as if it matters, until they lower their voices near it, until they bring small offerings, until they tell the story in the right order so the memory doesn't slip. Egypt believed the world stayed stable because it was correctly repeated. So the priests begin their quiet support work above the digging, like a second layer of the same task. They recite names, not the dramatic secret names that crack creation open, but the ordinary holy names that keep doors oiled in the unseen. Harmachis, Horus in the horizon, Lord of the place where light touches stone. Titles pile up like folded linen. Each title is a soft reassurance. This is who you are, this is where you belong, this is how we know you. And because words matter, the work gets easier to imagine as part of a larger system. The Sphinx is not just a big lion. He's a face in the divine bureaucracy. He has a file. He has a function. He has expectations. There's a little humor in that, if you let yourself smile without becoming fully awake. Ancient gods with titles are like modern apps with too many permissions. Access to horizons, granted. Access to royal legitimacy, granted. Access to your name, granted. The difference is that in Egypt, people didn't pretend they read the terms and conditions. They carved them in stone, so future generations would be forced to read them whether they wanted to or not. The workers keep digging, and the plateau wind, usually so eager to rearrange everything, seems to forget itself for a while. It is one of those mornings when the air holds still, as if it too is watching. Dust hangs gently, then settles. A distant bird circles without drama. Somebody's stomach growls and is immediately silenced with a piece of bread that tastes like effort. The prince drinks water, and the water feels like the only cool thing permitted in this story. Now and then, someone finds something unexpected in the sand, an old fragment of pottery, a bead, a small stone that looks like it has been handled. The desert is full of leftovers. Egypt is full of layers. And each little discovery becomes a micro-story. Who dropped this? When? Why? What were they thinking? Did they yawn? Did they complain about the heat like you would? It's easy to drift into these small questions because they are safe questions. They don't demand urgency. They are the kind of curiosity that keeps your mind gently engaged while your body relaxes, the way you might idly wonder who invented the spoon. Someone did. Someone decided soup needed help. Egypt would approve of that kind of practical invention. The digging progresses not with big leaps, but with gradual reveal. The Sphinx's chest becomes clearer. The paws, those enormous, patient paws, begin to sit in the light as if they have always been there, and the sand was simply being rude. The face, still higher, still half in shadow, seems to wait. Faces wait well. Faces are good at that. Your own face right now can relax without needing to perform. The Sphinx's face does not have to perform either. It only has to exist, and that is the quiet power of monuments. And because Egypt loved to connect everything to everything, the work starts to echo other tasks. The clearing of the Sphinx becomes like clearing a canal after silt buildup. It becomes like cleaning a shrine before a festival. It becomes like unwrapping a mummy carefully, one layer at a time, not to shock the dead back to attention, but to restore the shape of someone's identity. Ritual and labor blur together until you can tell which part is religion and which part is construction. In Egypt, that line was always thin, like the line between sleep and waking in the hottest part of the day. The overseer continues counting, and his counting becomes its own kind of spell. Not formal magic, not theatrical, just the steady insistence that progress is real because it can be numbered. He might joke quietly that if the god wants to breathe, the god will have to accept being measured in baskets. A god measured in baskets. It's a gentle thought. It makes the divine approachable. It makes the task feel possible. Egypt did this a lot. It turned the cosmic into the manageable, not by shrinking the cosmic, but by enlarging the importance of the manageable. You can imagine the prince later telling himself the story in the simplest terms. I slept. A face spoke. I promised. We dug. The rest, crowns, councils, politics, can come later. Right now, the promise is kept one basket at a time. This is the part the dream didn't romanticize, and that's why it feels trustworthy. A real bargain has a maintenance plan. A real god apparently can be pleased by routine. And as the morning grows warmer, and the worker's shoulders shine with sweat that dries almost instantly, the pace doesn't become frantic. It remains deliberate, like a lullaby with repetitive notes. Sand shifts, baskets lift. Water is sprinkled again, exactly enough to make edges hold. The priest murmurs names that sound like warm stones in the mouth. The Sphinx's shape emerges more and more, not as a sudden reveal, but as a steady returning, like a memory you keep revisiting until it stops feeling like a dream and starts feeling like something you can touch. If you let your own thoughts follow that rhythm, they can soften too. Scoop, lift, step, pour. Inhale 4, exhale 6. A vow doesn't need fireworks. It needs returning. And the dessert, patient as it is, will always try to tuck everything back in. That is its job. The human's job is the opposite, to keep making space, quietly, politely, as if the whole world depends on a face having room to breathe, which in this story it does. And the baskets keep moving, and the sand keeps pouring, and the light keeps sliding over stone in the same calm way, as if it could go on, as if the day itself is just another careful handful added to a promise that never quite ends. A promise can be loud in a dream and then very quiet in real life. It doesn't always arrive with trumpets and lightning. Sometimes the first sign that a bargain is actually working is something almost boring, like a road getting a little busier or a scribe sharpening his reed pen with the patient seriousness of someone preparing to become mildly annoyed for a living. And if you listen closely, you can feel how Egypt liked it that way. Fake meaning, small evidence. The universe stays stitched together by details that look, at first glance, like paperwork. So when the sun rises again after the first clearings, after the baskets and the water and the steady hands, the plateau begins to change in soft, practical ways, not dramatic ways. The kind of change you notice with the corner of your mind. The way you notice your room is slightly cooler because someone finally closed the window. Paths to Memphis thicken with footsteps. Someone brings a donkey loaded with jars, not because the gods demanded a parade, but because people need water wherever people gather, and people gather wherever a story is forming a spine. A few estates shift their attention, which is a polite phrase for resources begin to move. Bread appears, beer appears. Wreaths of greenery appear, looking almost embarrassed to be so alive on all that pale sand. Even the wind seems to pause now and then, as if it's waiting to see whether it should be respectful or simply be itself. The Sphinx, meanwhile, does what stone does best. It stays. It does not clap. It does not thank anyone in a theatrical voice. It simply holds its shape in the light, more visible now, more legible. And there is something oddly comforting in that steadiness. The promise was never that the world would become exciting. The promise was that a divine face would be freed from choking sand, and a human name would be freed from being small. Both are, in their own careful way, problems of breath. Both are solved not by a single grand gesture, but by a long habit of maintenance. You can feel the habit beginning to settle in. A morning routine grows around the monument like a second shadow. Someone checks the edges where sand likes to creep back in, the way you might check the corners of a room for dust with the fatalistic knowledge that dust has a social life and will return. Someone else smooths a section of stone with a cloth that has been folded and refolded so many times it has the softness of an old thought. The tools are simple, the pace is slow. The intention is steady. In Egypt, steady intention was practically a form of magic. And because humans are humans, and humans love stories that can be pointed to, the stilla becomes important. It's set between the paws like a bookmark, and it holds the tale in place so it cannot drift. If you've ever tried to remember a dream without writing it down, you know what Egypt feared? Memory is slippery. The desert is slippery. The mind is slippery. Stone, however, is obedient in a way that thoughts are not. Stone will sit there and keep the sentence exactly as it was, even when everyone who carved it is gone. It's a very ancient version of saving the file, only heavier and less forgiving if you drop it. The words on the stela settle into the day. A prince rested, a god spoke, a bargain was made. And there's dry humor in how straightforward this is, because life is rarely straightforward, and yet the inscription behaves as if it is. It has that calm confidence of official text. It doesn't say the prince was sweaty and cranky and had sand in his mouth. It doesn't say the flies were extremely committed to their role. It doesn't say the desert tried to tuck the Sphinx back in every night like an overprotective ant. It says the clean version. The version that can be repeated without anyone clearing their throat. People come to read it. Some are literate. Some are not. Egypt solved this with a kind of gentle teamwork. Those who can read become briefly the voice of the stone. They read softly because something in the posture of the Sphinx makes loudness feel rude. It's not fear, it's instinct. You don't shout at a face that has been watching horizon for longer than your great-grandfather's great-grandfather's polite excuses. So visitors lean in and listen, and the person reading turns into a temporary priest of storytelling, pronouncing names with care. Harmachis, Horus in the horizon, Thutmose, and each name has weight, not because it's dramatic, but because it's placed deliberately like a brick set straight. And you can imagine the prince, now a king, now wearing the double crown, now dealing with councils and the soft chaos of court life, returning to the spot when he can. Not to be worshipped exactly, more like to be reminded. His reign, like all reigns, is a long hallway of decisions. Some of those decisions will be forgotten. Some will be regretted. Some will feel, in hindsight, like bad math. But here, between the pause, the story is simple. A promise was made. A promise is kept. It's a surprisingly soothing equation. Of course, keeping a promise in Egypt rarely meant doing it once. Keeping it meant repeating it. The stela is not a finale. It is a reminder posted on the wall of the universe. Do not let the sand return. Do not neglect the god. Do not let the bargain become a nice anecdote that drifts off into the heat. So the rituals begin to attach themselves to the story, like calendars snapping onto a date. A certain day becomes the day we clear. A certain season becomes the season we check the edges. Offerings are brought not as bribes, but as maintenance. Bread for stability. Beer for comfort. Incense for that invisible layer of cleanliness that smoke seems to provide. Wreaths for the simple fact that something green feels like a vote of confidence against the desert. It's quietly funny in a sleepy way how often beer appears in Egyptian religion. If you wanted the gods to feel included, you provided beer. If you wanted a fierce goddess to calm down, you provided beer, sometimes dyed red. Because gods, like humans, can be tricked by aesthetics when they're tired. If you wanted a ritual to feel complete, you included beer, because beer is what humans know how to make in large quantities with sincere devotion. There is a small modern analogy here that when tea disturbs your sleep, sometimes the most spiritual thing at a gathering is simply that someone remembered snacks. Egypt just took that concept and gave it cosmic importance. A priest might pour a little beer as an offering, letting it darken the sand in a brief, fragrant stain. He might raise incense that smells of kiffy-sweet resin and herbs, and the faint suggestion of a good night's rest. The smoke curls upward and then sideways, looking for rules it can follow. People stand quietly, perhaps shifting their weight, perhaps squinting, perhaps thinking about nothing more complicated than how bright the sky is, and that is allowed. In Egypt, you did not have to feel intense emotion to participate in the sacred. You simply had to show up and keep the pattern going. Somewhere nearby, a scribe records the ritual. He writes down dates the way you might set recurring reminders on your phone, except with more elegance and fewer tiny icons. He knows professionally that humans forget. He knows spiritually that forgetting is a kind of disorder. So his ink becomes a second defense against the sand. The desert erases with wind. The scribe resists with ink. Between them, time is negotiated like a contract. And when you widen your gaze beyond the stela and the pause and the offerings, you can see the promise rippling out into Egypt's ordinary life. Roads become just a little sturdier because people keep using them. A market hears stories and begins to treat this tale as common knowledge. That's the king who made a deal with the Sphinx, someone says, biting into bread. And the phrase carries the soft satisfaction of a story that has found its proper shelf. A few officials might roll their eyes behind polite faces because officials are born with the ability to be tired of everything, even miracles. But even they will schedule workers, even they will allocate resources. Even they will, in their own boring way, honor the bargain because the bargain has become policy. And perhaps that's the most Egyptian thing of all, how smoothly myth becomes administration. A god speaks in a dream, and then the response is not only awe, it is logistics. Teams are assigned, cycles are established. Taxes of grain might be redirected to pay for clearing crews, because clearing sand is part of keeping the kingdom aligned with Ma'at. If you neglect the god, you risk imbalance, and imbalance has a way of showing up later as something you can easily sweep away, like bad harvests or social unrest, or simply the creeping sense that the world has lost its rhythm. Egypt disliked losing rhythm. Rhythm was comfort. So, in a calm way, the Sphinx stays awake through the rain. It stays dusty because dust is a default setting in the desert, but it is no longer drowned. The face remains visible, the paws remain present, the stela remains readable. Visitors keep coming. Some come with sincere devotion, some come with curiosity. Some come because someone told them as good luck to stand near a god who's been bargained with and maintained. Some come simply because it's impressive, and humans enjoy being impressed as long as it doesn't require too much walking. And as you imagine them arriving, you can keep the scene sleepy. People speak softly. Sand crunches underfoot in small, steady sounds. A jar clinks gently against a basket. A child reaches out and is gently pulled back, because stone is not a toy, even if it looks like a magnificent one. Someone's sandal strap breaks at the worst moment, and they fix it with the resigned patience of someone who knows the gods are not responsible for footwear. The smell of incense drifts, then thins. The sun continues its slow job of turning everything warm. If you're still awake at this point, you can do the small modern ritual of your own subscribe, if you like or don't. Let the thought float downstream like a reed boat with no passenger. The Nile won't judge you, and neither will the Sphinx, which is famously bad at clicking buttons. Now the story wants to become something even quieter. Not the public part, with visitors and offerings, but the private part of keeping the bargain alive inside your own mind. because that's what the stela really does if you let it. It turns a myth into a bedtime oath. It tells you gently that promises do not have to be dramatic to be real. They can be measured in baskets. They can be maintained in small, repeated acts. They can be kept by returning to the same spot again and again, and doing what needs to be done without expecting applause. So you gather the facts in your mind the way Egyptians gathered offerings, not in a frantic heap, but in separate jars that keep things from spilling into each other. Sleep in one jar, vow in another, digging in another, stone in another. A prince's breath measured in 4 and 6, tucked somewhere safe. A god's complaint. I choke on desert, treated not as drama, but as a maintenance note. Egypt loved maintenance notes. The universe itself, in their view, required daily upkeep. Even the sun needed help to rise, not because it was weak, but because order is a group project. And there is something deeply soothing about that worldview when you're trying to sleep. It removes the pressure to be heroic. It replaces it with the permission to be consistent. If something feels impossible, you don't have to solve it tonight. You measure it differently. You measure it in baskets, not years. You measure it in small choices, not grand transformations. You agree with the sun to meet at dawn, and then you allow yourself to be quiet until then. The bargain is not that everything becomes easy. The bargain is that effort repeated can change what looks permanent. Even the desert, which pretends to be eternal, is actually restless. It shifts constantly. It moves grain by grain. The only reason it seems unchanging is that its change is slow and repetitive. Humans can do slow and repetitive too. The Sphinx proves it. The stela proves it. The king's reign, with all its paperwork and rituals and careful scheduling, proves it in the most boring way possible, which is often the most trustworthy way. So the plateau breathes in heat and breathes out wind, softly, over and over. The lion's face holds its expression, neither smiling nor frowning, simply present. The stela sits between the paws like a sentence that refuses to be lost. Somewhere, a crew will return tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, because sand is loyal to its job, and humans must be loyal to theirs. Incense will rise in small curls and then vanish. Beer will be poured and then dry. Names will be spoken and then forgotten, and then spoken again, as if repetition is the true shape of devotion. And if your own thoughts begin to drift, that's fine. Let them. Let them move like the desert wind, but without its sharpness. Let them be small, like grains, like syllables, like counted breaths. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. A promise held rarely feels like a trumpet blast. More often it feels like a quiet room where the locks work, where the calendar is kept, where the face in the sand can breathe, where the day continues without needing to announce itself. And the story can simply keep going in that soft direction, returning to the same gentle images, stone, shadow, baskets, ink, incense, until the edges blur a little, and the words become as smooth and sleepy as sand, settling back into a place it has been told politely not to claim tonight. It's a strange, sleepy thing, how a crown can begin as a nap. Not the dramatic kind of nap that changes the weather, just the ordinary kind hot air, heavy eyelids, a mind drifting into the shade by accident. And yet, in Egypt, that kind of nap could be treated like official paperwork. A dream becomes a document. A sentence spoken by stone becomes a policy statement. The universe shrugs softly and says, yes, that counts. You can almost imagine a scribe somewhere quietly clearing his throat and deciding this will need to be written down in a very neat hand. So the story slides gently from sand into corridors. From the open plateau, where wind combs the dunes like a patient stylist, into rooms where the air is cooler and smells faintly of linen and old incense. Messages run ahead of the prince long before his sandals do. News always runs ahead. It runs like water down a slight slope. People in Memphis hear that a divine face has been cleared. that a god has been appeased, that a young man has been noticed by something older than the city walls. And they do what people always do with holy information. They fold it into ordinary life. They repeat it while pouring beer. They repeat it while weighing grain. They repeat it the way you repeat a rumor you're trying to turn into certainty. He slept by the Sphinx, someone murmurs, as if that explains everything. And in Egypt, it almost does, because sleeping in the right place was not laziness. It was positioning. If you're still awake while we walk into these quieter rooms, you can subscribe, if you like, in the same gentle spirit Egypt used for vows, no pressure. No flair, just a small mark that says, yes, I might return to this again. Or you can let that thought drift off like a little reed boat without a passenger. The Nile is famously relaxed about these things, and so is a lion made of stone. Inside the palace, nothing slams. Doors do not announce themselves. Curtains move the way water moves. Councils gather in the slow rhythm of people who know the day is long, and the state is even longer. In those meetings, a dream is not treated as a bedtime story. It becomes a useful object like a seal ring or a measuring rod. The dream has terms. It has a bargain. It has a god's very specific complaint sand in the face, breath interrupted, dignity slightly choked. And a god's complaint, oddly enough, is easier to handle than a human one. A god will keep the same complaint for centuries. Humans change their minds every afternoon. Older brothers exist in the background of this scene like polite furniture present, heavy, rarely moved. You can picture them with carefully arranged expressions, the kind that look respectful from far away and tired up close. In royal households, succession is a delicate thing, not because anyone is shouting, but because everyone is thinking. It's like a room full of people all holding cups of water, trying not to spill. The dream runs through that room as a quiet argument, not a knife-edged argument, a soft argument, the kind made of glances and approving murmurs, and the sudden interest everyone develops in the floor pattern. The god spoke to him, someone says gently, as if they are offering the sentence on a small tray. Another person nods, because nodding is a safe sport. Someone else says, even more gently, then the god expects something, which is the Egyptian way of saying, congratulations, this is now administrative. And perhaps that is why the dream feels so convincing, because it comes with chores. It demands labor. It demands clearing. It demands maintenance. It is not just a flattering vision. It is a contract. Contracts are comforting. They have edges. They make the world feel measurable. A promise phrase like a contract is easier to trust than a promise phrase like poetry, and Egypt loved both, but it trusted contracts in a particularly calm way. You can almost see the priests of Harmachis taking note, adjusting their calendars, assigning duties, deciding what offerings are appropriate for a god who has been inconvenienced by weather. Somewhere, quietly, an oracle is consulted, not for fireworks, for confirmation. Egypt liked confirmation the way a careful person likes double-checking a door lock. The answer, whatever form it takes, dream, sign, ritual response, lands with the clean finality of a stamp on clay. The edge cuts cleaner than rumor, as you already know. Rumor spreads like dust. Oracle, at least in theory, settles like a stone placed where it is meant to be. And once the stone is placed, everyone can pretend they are simply following order, not making choices. This is a comforting trick humans have always used. If a god told us, then it's not awkward that we agreed. The coronation itself is less like a battle and more like a rehearsal that has been repeated so many times in Egypt, as imagination that it has worn a smooth groove. There are smells before there are symbols. Oil warmed by hands, resin smoke rising in thin threads, linen that has been washed and folded until it behaves. Words spoken in a steady tone, because steadiness is what makes words effective. And then the crown appears, not one crown, but the idea of two becoming one. Egypt, as you've noticed, enjoyed pairs. Upper and lower, black land and red land, day and night, sleep and waking. Even the king is a kind of pair, one body, many titles. You can picture the double crown as a practical object, not a cartoon, as something with weight, as something that would make your neck aware of itself. It sits while people stand. It is placed, adjusted, made symmetrical. The uraeus cobra at the forehead does not hiss in this moment. It simply exists as a sign that says, watchful. The vulture, too, is there in the symbolism, maternal and wide-winged, and it's all very calm, because Egypt's power often liked to dress itself in protection rather than aggression. Even the gestures are measured. Hands move like someone arranging a room, not someone trying to impress an audience. And because Egypt never liked empty time, the coronation is counted. Counted like copper on stone. Measured, inevitable, already rehearsed, as the plan says. Scribes note the day. Priests recite names, not for drama, but for accuracy. Names are tools here. Names oil the hinge of reality. If you speak them correctly, the world opens the way it is supposed to open, with no sticking. If you speak them carelessly, things squeak, things catch, and nobody wants a squeaky universe, especially not on a day meant to feel smooth. It's quietly funny, in a very sleepy way, that so much of divine kingship depends on diction. You would think a king's power would come from muscles or weapons or loud speeches. But in Egypt, a large portion of it comes from saying the right things at the right time, while wearing the right fabric, while holding very still. It's like the most ancient form of customer service training. Please say the royal names clearly. Please stand within the marked area. Please do not anger the cosmic order by improvising. Somewhere in the background, the gods nod approvingly because they also dislike improvisation when it affects their schedule. The story of the dream is retold as policy because policy needs a story the way a boat needs a hull. You can see officials using it gently, like a lever. We must maintain the Sphinx, they say, and the sentence now has legal weight. We must keep the plateau clear, they say, and suddenly labor is not just labor, it is piety. Grain allocations shift in small, sensible ways, where crews are organized. The dream becomes a reason that feels clean enough to print onto reality. People like reasons. Even when the reason is a talking lion, people will accept it if it comes packaged with routine. And routine is where the bargain really lives. Not in the initial moment of waking with sand in the mouth, but in the long, quiet seasons afterward, when enthusiasm fades and only habit remains. Egypt was skilled at building habit around holiness. A temple does not run on excitement, it runs on schedules. It runs on someone remembering to refill the incense. It runs on someone remembering the correct hymn. It runs on someone knowing where the ladle is, because offerings are awkward if you can't pour them. The dream, in a sense, hires Egypt to be itself, a culture that keeps the world steady by repeating the right gestures with a calm face. If you imagine the young king, now Thutmose, wearing the double crown, hearing petitions, watching scribes lay out documents the way bakers lay out loaves, he might feel the dream at odd moments. Not as a thunderbolt, but as a dry line of humor in his mind. The god asked to be freed from sand, and now the king is bound to paperwork forever. There's a symmetry in that. The Sphinx wanted breath, the king wanted a name. Each got what he asked for, and each got the side effects. The god stays visible, which means it must be maintained. The king becomes prominent, which means he must be responsible. A bargain, after all, never gives without also giving you something to carry. In council rooms, help always has a price, even when it is divine. The price is attention. The price is offerings. The price is not forgetting. That last one is the hardest, because forgetting is what humans do when they get comfortable. So Egypt builds reminders, steely ritual days. Processions that are not exciting but very functional. You can almost see someone in the administration sighing and saying, yes, yes, we must schedule the Sphinx again. And then they do it because in Egypt, the line between religion and public works is more like a soft gradient than a hard border. Outside on the plateau, the Sphinx continues to do the most powerful thing stone can do. It holds its shape. It does not demand emotional displays. It does not ask to be loved loudly. It asks for clearance. It asks for breath. It asks for the simple dignity of not being buried up to the chest, like someone who fell asleep at a beach party and was pranked by the wind. And every time a crew lifts another basket of sand away from its paws, the bargain is paid again, quietly, the way you pay a bill you actually respect. If you let your own mind follow that rhythm detail, context, a tiny dry smile, back to calm, you might notice how soothing the whole structure is. A dream makes a request. A human answers with routine. Routine becomes the shape of safety. It's almost like the world is saying, don't worry. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just keep showing up. That's the kind of advice that sounds obvious in daylight and becomes mysteriously wise at night. And as we keep drifting through this third scene, we can stay with the small items that make it feel real. The crown's inner lining, perhaps slightly itchy against the forehead. The smell of heated resin on a priest's fingers. The soft scrape of a reed pen on papyrus. The little piles of sand that still appear at the edge of the plateau each morning, as if the desert is politely testing whether the agreement is still valid. The way a visitor lowers their voice without being told, because some places teach humans how to behave just by existing. The way a king learns quickly that power is less about commanding and more about maintaining. And if sleep begins to approach you the way it approached the prince, lowly, like a cold jug tipped carefully, you can let it. You don't have to hold on tightly to every name, every title, every symbol. You can keep just a few things in your mind, like Egypt kept a few essential facts in jars. A dream, a promise, a crown, a road that grows busier, a god that can finally breathe. The rest can fade softly around them like incense thinning into night air, like the last grain of sand sliding off a carved paw, like a sentence on stone continuing to exist even after you stop listening to it steady and unread, doing its quiet work in the dark. It's a strangely calming thought that a royal destiny in Egypt could hinge on something as ordinary as a nap, yet the continuing proof of that destiny would be much less poetic and much more like keeping a quiet household running. A dream can hand you a promise, but it can't carry the trays afterward. Somewhere between the paws of the Sphinx Harmaket, the horizon face with a lion's body, and the expression of someone who has watched human plans come and go like weather, the bargain settles into a soft routine, not thrilling, not dramatic, just steady, like a lamp being refilled, again, without complaint. Once the crown sits where it's supposed to sit, the agreement becomes a calendar problem. Not a crisis, just a schedule. The Sphinx is not the kind of god you visit once, like a museum, and then forget about. He's more like a monument that keeps reminding you, gently, that sand is always trying to redecorate. So the bargain is paid in small, repeatable payments. Offerings, words, smoke, water, flowers, and the kind of attention that doesn't sparkle but does not stop. You can imagine the first priest of the morning stepping into the plateau, seat with the resigned serenity of someone who knows the desert will not be defeated, only managed. He is not here to win, he is here to maintain. Offerings in Egypt are rarely loud, they are practical. Bread that still smells like grain, beer that is cool enough to feel merciful, water poured with a careful wrist, because even a simple pour can be done with dignity. A wreath of greenery or flowers placed where it looks right, because beauty is also a kind of order. Incense always incense, because if the gods have a preference, It often involves good smells and consistent timing. And the Sphinx, being stone, does not eat in the way you or I eat. He receives, he recognizes. He accepts the gesture the way a sleepy mind accepts a blanket, not by analyzing it, but by relaxing into the idea that someone bothered to bring it. Beer is especially gentle as an offering, and not just because it's liquid and easy to pour. In Egyptian stories, beer has a reputation for doing quiet, world-saving work without taking credit. It can be dyed red, offered to a furious goddess, and persuade her to nap instead of turning existence into a bad day for everyone. That is an impressive resume for a drink that also shows up at a normal dinner. So when beer is poured for the Sphinx, it feels like a soothing substance being used for its most Egyptian purpose, preventative peace. It's not celebration beer. It's please continue to be reasonable universe beer. Bread is the same. Bread is not just food. It's proof that Egypt still knows how to behave. Grain becomes flour, flour becomes loaf. Loaf becomes something you can hold, and holding it makes the world feel less slippery. If you want to get very sleepy about it, you can picture the whole chain fields, harvest, threshing, grinding, kneading, and then, at the end, a small warm loaf placed before stone. The god does not chew it. The god simply receives the order inside it. And the priest, after the offering is complete, often consumes what was offered because the offering has done its job. The divine and the practical share space in a way that would make modern paperwork nervous, but Egypt was comfortable with it. It is one of the reasons the whole system feels oddly cozy. Sacred acts are not separate from daily life. They're woven into it like linen. And then the incense climbs. Smoke is one of the softest materials humans can offer because it has no weight and no stubbornness. It rises, curls, thins, vanishes like a thought dissolving as you fall asleep. When resin hits a brazier, it makes a small sound of protest, a polite hiss, as if the air is briefly annoyed at being asked to smell beautiful. In later periods, people loved Kifi-blended resins and herbs and woods, something like a slow, aromatic sigh. Even if you don't name the recipe, the idea is simple. Good scent, steady timing, no surprises. And if the smoke drifts along the Sphinx's cheek, the stone looks for a moment, almost warm, the way cold pottery warms in your hand. Not spooky, not intense, just temporarily less lonely. The words spoken during these rituals are often as careful as the objects. Egyptians appreciated precision the way a sleepy person appreciates a familiar bedtime routine. Names and titles are recited softly, not to impress an audience, but to keep the universe from getting sloppy. Hormaket, Lord of the Horizon. Great God, Guardian. And if you think it sounds repetitive, that is the point. Repetition is the sound of stability. You don't say the name once and hope it sticks. You say it again and again and again, like smoothing a wrinkled cloth until it lies flat. It is the most soothing kind of insistence. If you are still awake while imagining all this, you can do the modern equivalent of placing a small offering on the altar subscribe, if you want, and then let that thought drift away like incense smoke. The Sphinx will not judge you either way. The Sphinx has bigger patience than algorithms, and significantly fewer opinions about buttons. Of course, a bargain only stays alive if it stays remembered, and Egypt was famously devoted to memory. This is why the story is tied to dates. A calendar date is married to the bargain, so time can't wander off with it. And Egypt's timekeeping is both comforting and slightly complicated, like a blanket that is perfectly warm but folded in a way you don't understand. There is a civil calendar counting days with admirable stubbornness. There are lunar rhythms and feast cycles, and there are the stars, the decans rising in sequence through the night, as if the sky itself is keeping a neat shift schedule. Somewhere in the background of every ritual is the quiet idea that the cosmos runs on timetables. The sun has a route. The stars have appointments, and on the plateau, the Sphinx has an offering time. So priests keep an eye on clepsydra, the water clocks that measure time by careful dripping, and they keep an eye on the sun's angle. And they keep an eye on the festival cycle because the year has moods. There are days for certain gods, days for certain stories, days when you renew what you renewed last year because last year worked, and you don't argue with what works. In a way, it's like maintaining a tradition-heavy family group chat, except the messages are hymns and the scene status is interpreted as cosmic stability. And then there's the administrative side, which is where the bargain becomes almost hilariously human. Because if the Sphinx needs offerings, someone needs to supply them. That means storerooms. That means inventory. That means scribes with patient wrists and an intimate relationship with tally marks. Egypt did not pretend holiness lived in a separate neighborhood from economics. If you want the sacred place maintained, you need labor. Labor needs food. Food comes from grain. Grain comes from taxes. Taxes come from bureaucracy. Bureaucracy comes from people who do not get enough credit for keeping the world from wobbling. The bargain, in other words, flows outward like a little river of responsibilities, and the river has the faint scent of paperwork. You can picture a scribe sitting in shade real shade, not metaphorical shade ink palette beside him reed pen trimmed just so, and he is recording deliveries. Jars, loaves, beer, incense, linen strips, flowers, when they can be found fresh enough to be respectable. He is not thinking about cosmic destiny in an emotional way. He is thinking, do we have enough? Which is perhaps the most sacred question anyone can ask when maintaining a world. Now we arrive at the truly inevitable part of the bargain, sand. The desert does not negotiate. It does not care that a prince once nodded in his sleep. It creeps. It accumulates. It fills gaps the way silence fills a room after conversation stops. So the bargain includes periodic clearing, not as a one-time heroic act, but as ongoing maintenance. A god is like a canal, really. Maintain it, and it keeps doing its quiet job. Neglect it, and you borrow trouble from next year. Egypt understood borrowed trouble with the exhausted clarity of farmers who have seen the same problems return in cycles, always slightly improved at being annoying. So teams are assigned. Overseers arrive with calm faces. Not panicked, not theatrical, just focused, as if sand removal is a normal task because, frankly, it is. People bring baskets made of reeds. They shovel and lift and carry, each load a small syllable in the long sentence of keeping a sacred landscape readable. Work is counted in handfuls, not hours, because the desert sets the pace. A handful of sand is honest. An hour is only honest if the sun agrees. Sometimes water is sprinkled, not to bless the sand in a dramatic way, but to make it behave. Dry sand is slippery and rebellious. Damp sand is cooperative. Even gods benefit from basic physics. You can imagine a priest or worker muttering very respectfully that the sand is being difficult today, as if sand can hear and feel shame. It cannot, but the act of speaking to it might still make the worker feel less alone, and that too is a kind of order. And while baskets move and feet press patterns into the plateau, the ritual side continues like a soft heartbeat. A quick renewal of incense, a replacement wreath before it goes brown, a word spoken at the right moment, because even during maintenance, someone must keep the sacred thread from snapping. The universe in this view is not held together by big speeches. It is held together by people who remember to show up and do the small things again. Egypt also had a strong belief in the power of substitutes, models, images, words that stand in for realities if arranged correctly. So if the real loaves are delayed, a symbolic loaf can still be presented. If the real offering table is far away, a small card representation might do the job. The point is not to cheat the gods. The point is to keep the pattern intact. In a sleepy way, it is like humming the melody of a song when you can till you remember all the lyrics. The tune still carries you. The rhythm still holds. The world still feels properly aligned, and the bargain is also paid by ordinary people, sometimes without intending to participate in anything official. Visitors come to the Sphinx and naturally lower their voices, as if the stone face has issued an invisible volume rule. They step into the shade between the paws, where the air is slightly cooler and time feels briefly less demanding. They read the stela, those carved words that pin the story in place: prince, dream, promise, sand, throne. A contract in stone, which is perhaps the most Egyptian genre of writing. Whoever doubts can read. Whoever reads will picture the bargain, whether they want to or not. That is the quiet power of carving. It turns memory into an object you can't easily misplace. If you want a gentle modern comparison, think of the stela as a receipt that never fades. Not a flashy receipt, not a coupon, a serious receipt. The kind you keep in an envelope because someday you might need to prove something happened. Except here, the something is a divine promise, and the envelope is the space between a lion's paws. It's absurd and comforting at the same time, which is a very Egyptian mood. And because nothing in Egypt stays isolated, the Sphinx's cult sits among a whole neighborhood of protective presences. The Eye of Horus on amulets carefully drawn so the lions don't get lazy. They squat and fierce and strangely soothing, like a loud little guardian assigned to keep nightmares out of your bedroom. Taret, the hippo goddess with a protective belly and a face that seems to say, kindly, sleep, I am watching. These are not rivals to a huge stone guardian. They are part of the same gentle project, keeping life livable, keeping the invisible rules from slipping. Even Ra's famous schedule, the solar bark, moving through the Duet, the 12 hours of careful progress fits this atmosphere of steady repetition. The cosmos is maintained through roots and names and timing, gates opened with correct words, dangers handled not with screaming, but with procedure. If you think about that long enough, it stops being scary and becomes surprisingly soothing. Somewhere in myth, there is always a boat that keeps moving at a patient pace. Somewhere, there is always a ritual being performed correctly. Somewhere, the world is being kept from unraveling by people who do not rush. So yes, the bargain is paid with incense and beer and wreaths, but it is also paid with monotony, the good kind. The kind that tells your nervous system nothing new is about to jump out. The kind that says, we have done this before. The kind that lets you relax in the certainty of repetition. The plateau is bright. The sand is stubborn. The stone face is calm. The offerings are placed. The words are spoken. The ledger is updated. The baskets move. The story remains. And maybe that is the most restful lesson buried inside the Sphinx as dream bargain. Not that miracles happen, but that life continues. A throne, once gained, becomes a promise to return. To the place where the dream was heard. To the chores that keep the dream honest. To the God's face that insists silently on being remembered, and the payment is not grand. It is just steady. It is doing what you said you would do again, in the same light, with the same careful hands, without needing applause. So the king keeps paying, the priests keep paying, the workers keep paying. The visitors pay in their own small coin of attention, by lowering their voices and reading the carved words as if reading is itself a gift. And the Sphinx remains sometimes dusty, never drowned, always waiting with that patient horizon face as the rituals. Drift on bread, beer, smoke water dates on a calendar, footsteps in sand. Soft repetitions that could continue and continue and continue like a slow breath. You no longer need to count. You might not expect the guardian of a whole night to be a god who looks like he could fit on a bedside table. But Egypt was very comfortable trusting small things with large responsibilities. A single amulet could stand in for a wall. A short spell could behave like a locked door. And a squat, lion-maned figure with a stubborn grin could take the entire midnight shift, as if the darkness itself had to sign in with him before it was allowed to enter. This is the cozy logic of Bess, the domestic protector who does not live far away in the sky, but close to where you breathe, where you sleep, where your thoughts loosen their grip and go wandering. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the air keep its quiet shape. Let the day's noise finish dissolving. You can imagine a simple Egyptian bedroom where the wall is plain, the floor is cool, and the headrest waits like a small carved bridge for the back of the skull. Outside, the night smells faintly of dust and river damp, and the stars have begun their patient rotation, each one arriving on time like an employee who has never once been late. Somewhere in a temple, a priest might be reciting big words, but here near the bed, the work is smaller, gentler, and somehow more practical. Here, a little god is on duty. And if you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe. Or you can let that thought drift away like incense smoke that forgot why it started rising. I won't know either way. Base isn't worried about it. Base is focused on the important things, like whether your dreams are behaving themselves. Base is not a distant, elegant deity in a tall crown. He is almost aggressively personal. He faces forward like someone meeting you directly, and the art makes him look like he's perpetually ready to intervene. The features are familiar and slightly comedic. A broad face, a protruding tongue in some depictions, a mane like a small lion that forgot to grow into a full one, legs that look sturdy enough to kick something invisible out of the room. He is the opposite of a smooth, perfect statue. He is the god of absolutely not, spoken gently but firmly at the edge of sleep. What's oddly soothing is that he's not there to judge you. He's not calculating your moral weight with a feather and a scale. He's not demanding heroic vows or dramatic purity. He is there because you are human, and humans sleep. And sleep is when the mind becomes a soft, unlocked house. In that unlocked house, strange guests sometimes wander in. Base is essentially the friend who says, quietly, you do not have to host them. So the bedroom becomes a quiet little fortress, not of stone, but of symbols. A faience amulet, blue-green like river light caught in glazed clay, might be hung nearby. A protective eye might be painted on something small, because the eye is a polite way of saying the room is already being watched. A headdress might carry a carved face of bays on the front, so that when you lay your head down, you are literally resting under his attention. It is a very intimate type of security system, and it doesn't beep or flash. It simply exists. It's the ancient equivalent of setting your phone to do not disturb, except the phone is a god, and the notifications are nightmares. And because Egypt loved specificity, the protection is not vague. It has a shape. It has a placement. It has rules. The amulet goes here, not there. The words are spoken this way, not that way. The charm is tied with a certain knot because knots are tiny physical promises. Even the materials matter. Blue-green is good because it recalls healthy growth and fresh water and that particular color of life that appears after the flood. Red can be powerful too, but red is also the color of hot danger, so it needs to be handled like spicy food, respected, measured, not spilled everywhere, unless you want a conversation with chaos. Inside this calm little system, Bais becomes an administrator of the night. He doesn't simply fight evil, he manages it. He keeps it in the category it belongs in. He stops it from wandering into the wrong room at the wrong hour. It's less like a battle and more like a well-run door policy. And the night in Egyptian imagination is full of schedules. Ra travels on his boat through the hours of darkness, passing gates that open only with correct names. The underworld is not a random horror show. It is an organized landscape with paperwork and passwords, which is honestly comforting if you think about it long enough. If the cosmos itself is running on a route, then your bedroom can run on a route as well. Evening arrives. Lamps dim. Incense might rise. Someone might murmur a protective phrase. The head meets the headrest. The breath slows. Base takes his post, and the mind stops trying to manage everything alone. In some stories and spells, malevolent forces are not defeated by yelling, but by naming. Names are tools. You say what something is, and it becomes less slippery. You tell a threat calmly that you recognize it, and it is suddenly forced to behave like a listed item rather than a wild, shapeless fear. This is why Egyptian protective magic can feel like bedtime language. It is repetitive, steady, quietly confident. It doesn't say, nothing can hurt you, because that would be too bold, and the universe doesn't like bold promises from humans. It says, this room has order. This room has guardians. This room has a plan, and Base, for all his funny face, is a plan. Imagine now the way his protection spreads into the surrounding household objects. He shows up on cosmetic containers because even eye paint can be part of protection. The eye is not only decorated, it is guarded. He appears on furniture, on little plaques, on items you touch every day, so that daily life itself becomes a soft ritual. In Egypt, the line between religious and ordinary is not a wall. It's a curtain. It moves. It breathes. It lets the sacred drift into your routine the way a good scent drifts into a room without demanding attention. And the humor comes naturally because Bes is not a solemn statue in a quiet hall. He is a domestic deity. Domestic life is full of small absurdities. Someone is always dropping something. Someone is always trying to sleep while the world continues making noises. Someone is always dealing with an upset baby or an anxious mind or a dream that arrived with muddy feet. Base belongs to that world. He doesn't pretend humans are graceful. He protects them anyway. In this sense, Biz is often paired in spirit with Tawret, the hippo goddess who protects pregnancy and childbirth. She looks like a creature designed by someone who wanted comfort and intimidation in the same package. A hippo body, a crocodile back, a lion's paws. The message is clear. Life is precious, and anyone who threatens it will find themselves in an unpleasant conversation. Bes and Tawret together are like the household's protective grandparents, except they are carved into amulets, and they do not give unsolicited advice about your posture. They simply keep watch. Now let the scene drift outward, gently, from the bed to the doorways and the thresholds. Egypt loved thresholds because thresholds are where categories change. Inside becomes outside. Safe becomes unknown. Awake becomes asleep. A threshold is not dramatic, but it is important. That's why protective figures and spells and symbols cluster there, like sleepy guards who know the only place you really need them is where boundaries blur. You can imagine a small lamp burning low. The flame raises a thin, steady heat. Shadows soften. In the distance, perhaps a dog barks once, and then remembers it's night and stops. The Nile, if it's nearby, continues its slow movement, which is the best kind of background sound, something alive that does not rush. And above, the stars tick through their sequence. The Egyptians watch certain stars, the decans, rise one after another, using them to measure the hours of night. It's as if the sky itself was whispering gently, yes, time is passing, but it is passing correctly. And if time is passing correctly, your sleep can pass correctly too. This is where Bes becomes not just a protector, but a rhythm. He is the reassurance that the night is not an empty wilderness. It is a place with rules, with roots, with guardians who have done this before. A tired mind loves that idea. A tired mind wants the world to be familiar. It wants the darkness to have a map. So the mind begins to loosen, and that is when dreams start to arrive. Dreams in Egypt are not always dismissed as random nonsense. They can be communication. They can be warning. They can be instruction. They can also be simply dreams. Sometimes a dream is just the brain cleaning house and throwing strange objects into strange boxes. But even then, the dream space is still treated as real enough to deserve protection. This is why the little god matters. If dreams are a place where something could enter, then dreams are a place where something should guard. You might picture a dream as a corridor, softly lit, where images drift past like boats. A crocodile that doesn't bite, just watches. A field of reeds that feels familiar even if you've never seen it. A voice speaking a name you can't quite remember when you wake. And somewhere in that corridor, B stands like a doorman with a sense of humor, flipping through a list. If a nightmare shows up, trying to look official, Baz squints at it and decides it is absolutely not on the list. The funny thing is, this kind of protection doesn't require the dream to become exciting. It doesn't add drama, it reduces it. It makes the night softer. The dream becomes less sharp-edged, less likely to stab you awake with sudden fear. Even if your brain produces something odd, it is held at a distance, like a strange neighbor seen through a window rather than an intruder in your kitchen. This is what the Egyptians wanted from their protective magic. Not spectacle, but comfort. Not fireworks, but boundaries. And boundaries can be made from very small things. A charm tied into linen. A little figure in faience. A carved face on wood. A phrase spoken once, slowly. Even the act of simply placing something in a certain spot can be a quiet ritual. It tells your mind, this is handled. It tells the world, this is ordered. It tells the night, you may pass, but you will behave. Now, let the scene shift again, not abruptly, but like a slow change in temperature. Imagine the city beyond the house. Imagine a temple somewhere, not roaring with crowds, but open enough to receive offerings. Base is not primarily a state god with large official processions, yet he appears everywhere because everyone sleeps. You can't centralize sleep. Sleep happens in villages and palaces, in modest homes, on rooftops, in courtyards when the air is cooler. So Bes becomes widely loved, widely carried, widely trusted, because he serves a need that follows you wherever you lay your head. This is one of the most charming things about Egyptian religion. It scales down. The same culture that imagines cosmic boats and celestial gates also imagines a tiny protector you can wear around your neck. A universe with enormous architecture still concerns itself with whether your baby sleeps, whether your wife is safe in childbirth, whether your dreams stay mild. The grand and the domestic sit side by side like two bowls on the same table. And as the night moves on, the household and the cosmos mirror each other. Outside, Raz's journey continues through the Duat. Inside, you continue through your private dream corridor. Outside, gates open with names. Inside, your mind opens gates to memories and sensations and odd little fears. Outside, guardians stand ready. Inside, Bes stands ready too, as calmly as a cat that has decided it owns the bed. If you want micro details to keep your sleepy curiosity engaged, you can think about the objects again. Faience is not just pretty, it's chemically clever. Quartz base, glazed, fired. It catches light like water catches the sun. That blue-green color was associated with freshness, protection, life. An amulet shaped like Bes in that color is like wearing a small piece of river morning against your skin. Even when you sleep, the amulet stays. It does not blink. It does not tire. It is a tiny, silent companion that never asks you to explain how you're feeling. Or think about the headdress, that strange piece of Egyptian furniture that looks uncomfortable to modern eyes, but made sense in their world. A curved top to support the neck, leaving the head raised, keeping hair arranged, keeping insects away, letting air move. A headdress is a practical object that becomes symbolic. It is literally what holds your head while you surrender consciousness. If a protective face is carved onto it, the object becomes a guardian at the moment you become most vulnerable. That's an elegant piece of design, no matter how you feel about the comfort. Or think about the way protective spells often repeat. Repetition is soothing. It's why lullabies work. It's why waves work. It's why the slow count of breath works. Egyptians understood the power of steady rhythm. Even their art repeats forms, not out of laziness, but out of devotion to the idea that order lasts by being maintained. And maintenance is the true theme of the quiet gods. Base is not usually the hero of a grand, climactic myth with a tidy ending. He is the hero of nights that do not become disasters. He's the reason the household wakes up and goes on. In a way, he is the patron of nothing happened, which is honestly what you want at 3 a.m. Nothing happened. The baby stayed asleep. The dream stayed mild. The room remained a room. The darkness did not bring announcements. So we drift toward the late night, when the air grows cooler and the mind grows heavier. The last few hours before dawn can feel like a deep well, and in that deep well, even small sounds become large. A creak, a cough, a shift of fabric. Egypt responded to this sensitivity not by denying it, but by surrounding it with protective presence. If the night makes you feel too aware, then the answer is not to fight awareness. The answer is to give awareness something gentle to hold. A symbol, a name. A quiet guardian with a ridiculous face who looks like he would happily bite a nightmare on your behalf. And the thought itself becomes a lullaby. Someone is watching. Someone is on duty. You do not have to be. So your breathing slows without argument. Your jaw loosens. Your shoulders stop trying to carry the day into the next one. The mind, which loves to patrol, begins to resign from its post, one small thought at a time. The corridor of dreams grows dimmer, softer, less full of sharp edges. Base remains, not moving, not shouting, not making a show of anything. He simply holds the boundary like a steady hand on a door that is meant to stay closed. And somewhere, beyond your private sleep, the sky continues its quiet schedule. Stars rise and set. The night's hours tick through their sequence. Ra's boat keeps its route, and the universe continues its ancient habit of repeating what works. Here, in the bedroom, the same gentle habit continues. Protection, repetition, softness, calm. The little god stays at the threshold. The room stays a room. The darkness behaves. And the night, having found no invitation, passes on quietly, as if it could continue forever, and doesn't need a conclusion to feel complete. There is something quietly comforting about a promise that lives in stone, not because stone is dramatic, but because stone is patient. A spoken vow can flutter. A written vow can smudge. But a vow carved into a slab and placed where the wind can read it every day is the sort of thing that doesn't need to raise its voice. It just sits there like a receipt you keep in a drawer, not because you enjoy paperwork, but because the universe occasionally asks for proof that you did, in fact, take care of what you said you would take care of. And in the Sphinx's dream bargain, the proof is not a thunderclap. It is maintenance. It is the slow, repetitive work of keeping a giant lion man from being swallowed again by the same sand he's been politely enduring for centuries. So imagine the world after the dream, not as a sharp before and after, but as a series of small, steady mornings. The heat arrives the way it always does, slowly, as if it's stretching. The plateau looks the same from far away, a pale sweep with hard edges softened by distance. Up close, everything is texture, grains that squeak under sandals rock that holds the day's warmth like a saved secret, and the Sphinx's face, which is a face only. Because humans insist on recognizing faces in anything that survives long enough. The Sphinx does not hurry. The Sphinx does not blink in any useful way. That is why the bargain needs humans. The god in the stone can promise. But the hands that lift baskets and move sand are alive, and the living are the ones who make promises visible. If you picture Thutmose still not quite the heavy, serene figure of later statues, still with the lightness of someone who recently fell asleep outside, you can picture him learning very quickly that divine agreements do not come with an automatic, complete button. They come with upkeep. It's like adopting a plant. The plant may be sacred, it may be gorgeous. It may even be connected to your destiny. But if you forget to water it, it will still behave like a plant. In Egypt, even gods appreciated follow-through. The follow-through has its own gentle rhythm. Workers come at dawn because the sun is less sharp then, and because dawn is the hour when you can pretend you are a disciplined person. Reed baskets are ready, not poetic, just practical. A foreman counts loads the way a sleepy mind counts sheep. 1, 2, 3, steady, not too emotional about it. Someone brings water skins because sand is cooperative only if you make it slightly heavier, slightly less eager to fly back into the air. Someone else brings bread and onions because labor needs fuel, and nobody wants to clear a god while hungry. If the bargain is cosmic, the process is domestic. It smells like sweat and damp reed. It sounds like shuffling, murmured instructions, and the soft scrape of sand moving away from stone that has been waiting a long time to be seen. And the Sphinx Hormicus, Horus in the horizon, a name that sounds like sunrise itself trying on a title, becomes gradually more present, not in a mystical glow, but in literal visibility. A paw emerges, a shoulder line, the curve where chest meets sand. It's not a resurrection scene. It's more like finding a familiar object in a messy room, the relief of recognizing its shape again. If you've ever brushed dust off a shelf and felt oddly proud, you already understand the emotional height of this story. The Egyptians would approve of that comparison. They had no problem with turning sacred things into routines, because routines are how order survives. Once the face is freed enough to look at you properly, eyes forward, expression fixed in that half-royal, half-untouchable calm, then the bargain needs its public language. Dreams are private, stones are public. That's where the stela comes in, placed between the paws like a bookmark in a long, sandy book. The stela does what Egypt loved most. It labels the moment. It pins a slippery story to an object and says, gently, "Here, this happened. This is the arrangement. Please behave accordingly." And the words on the stela are their own kind of soft spell. They name the prince. They name the god. They mention the sleep. They mention the sand. They turn a nap into policy, which is a very Egyptian skill. Taking something personal, making it formal, and then carving it into something that will outlast the person who started it. The stela is not just gratitude. It is a contract pinned to the world. Anyone who can read, reads. Anyone who cannot read still sees that something official has been set down, and official things have weight. The Sphinx may not move, but the story moves because it has been given a body made of text. There is a mildly absurd comfort in knowing that even divine beings like the Sphinx sometimes need a little publicity to keep humans consistent. Not because humans are evil, just because humans get distracted. Sandstorms happen, budgets shift. Someone important decides a different temple needs attention. A stela between paws is a reminder that does not require anyone to remember. It is the ancient equivalent of setting a recurring calendar event. Except instead of your phone vibrating, the monument sits there, enormous and silent, and everyone simply feels slightly accountable in its presence. And accountability in Egypt often wears a ritual costume. Offerings get arranged. Incense rises in a thin line, the most polite kind of smoke. Beer, surprisingly often, is involved, because beer is not just a drink. It's an offering that feels like life itself: grain, water, yeast, patience. Beer cools in shade, and the shade is not a small detail. Shade is precious out on the plateau. Shade is a gift you notice with gratitude, the way you notice a cool side of a pillow. To offer something cooled is to offer something cared for. Wreaths might be hung or laid, not because the Sphinx needs decoration, but because humans need to do something with their hands when they feel reverent. Flowers are a way of saying, "I understand this matters," without giving a speech. Even time gets tied to it. A date, a festival reference, a regular clearing, a schedule. Egypt loves schedules because schedules are order you can hold. The sky has its cycles. The Nile has its cycles. The king has his ritual duties. The gods have their rotes. So the Sphinx's bargain too becomes cyclical. The clearing, the offerings, the check-ins. If dunes creep back, which they always do because dunes are very committed to being dunes, then teams return. Not in panic, not with drama, just with baskets and quiet orders, like people doing seasonal maintenance on an irrigation channel. A god is like a canal, after all. Maintain it, or you borrow trouble from next year. And this is where the story turns sleepy in the best possible way. It becomes mostly about repetition. The exciting part, if you can call it that, is over. The prince had his dream. The stela was set. The face was seen. Now the rest is continuity. The roads to Memphis thicken with ordinary traffic. Estates change hands the way they always do. Scribes get busier at the edge of maps because maps are never finished. They just get updated like they're living documents. The king sits in rooms with locks that work. Councils murmur. Crowns rest on heads. None of it needs spectacle to be powerful. It simply continues. And out on the plateau, the Sphinx stays. Sometimes dusty, sometimes clearer, never entirely free of the desert's touch because the desert is affectionate in its own relentless way. Visitors come. They read the stela. They lower their voices without being told why, because it feels wrong to shout at something that has been listening for so long. If you've ever walked into a library and instinctively whispered, you understand. The Sphinx is a library of stone, and the wind is the librarian. People approach with offerings, with questions, with their own small hopes. The Sphinx answers in the only way it really can, by existing, by being there, by letting its presence do the talking. Now and then, someone will wonder about the dream itself. Was it truly a god speaking, or a young man's tired mind making meaning out of heat and exhaustion? And even if the dream was purely the mind's way of soothing itself, that would still be very Egyptian, because soothing the mind is not considered pointless. The mind is part of the person. A calm mind keeps might. A calm mind does not invite chaos for entertainment. In that sense, a dream that persuades you to do something orderly is almost automatically sacred. It's like being quietly encouraged to tidy your room and then finding out the room feels better. You don't need a thunderbolt. You just need the result. So the bargain becomes something you can carry, even centuries later, as a kind of bedtime oath of your own. Not loud, not heroic, just practical. Keep facts in one jar, sleep, vow, dig, steal it. Keep awe in another jar, small, steady, labeled, not spilling all over your floor like an emotion you can't clean up. If a task looks impossible, measure it in baskets, not years. Agree with the sun to meet at dawn, because dawn is when big things become manageable by being broken into small ones. Pay promises as maintenance, not miracle. Let receipts be stone and ritual rather than talk, because talk is light and stone is heavy, and sometimes it helps to make your intentions heavy. And if you feel the need for a modern comparison, let it be gentle. This is not the myth of a lightning strike that changes everything overnight. It's the myth of a recurring responsibility you accept, like keeping an old street lamp lit, like checking on a friend who never asks, like refilling the same water bowl every day because life quietly depends on it. The Sphinx is not rescued once. The Sphinx is rescued repeatedly in small increments by people who show up with baskets and patience. That is the calmest form of devotion. So the night can borrow the shape of that devotion. Your own bargain here can be small. You do not have to wrestle the desert. You do not have to carve a stela. You only have to allow the breath to do its steady work. Inhale 4, exhale 6, as if you are counting baskets of sand away from the face of the mind. Inhale 4, exhale 6, as if you are making room for the part of you that wants to rest without negotiating. If thoughts creep back like dunes, you do not panic. You return with quiet orders. You lift them, set them aside, and let the room of your head become visible again. Somewhere in the wide imagination of Egypt, Ra continues his nightly route, his boat passing gate after gate with names that fit like keys. Somewhere the decans rise in their patient sequence, measuring the hours like a slow heartbeat in the sky. Somewhere scribes keep writing because writing is another form of order. And order is the only thing that convinces the world to keep turning politely. And somewhere the Sphinx sits with the calm of something that has been weighted on by wind for too long to be impressed by human hurry. You can let that calm settle into you, not as a grand revelation, but as a texture. The texture of stone that does not rush. The texture of sand that moves, yes, but only at its own pace. The texture of a promise that does not demand constant excitement to remain true. And if the mind tries to wrap up the story neatly, if it wants a dramatic conclusion, a final sentence, a tidy bow, you can refuse gently, the way a sleepy priest might refuse to rush a ritual. There is no need to finish. There is only the ongoing work of keeping the space clear enough to breathe. So the dune exhales again softly, because dunes do that when the wind shifts. The lion's face remains where it is, half shadowed, half lit, as if it is always halfway between waking and dreaming. The stylus stays between the paws, a bookmark that does not insist you close the book. The promise holds with the quiet stubbornness of stone. And your own room, here and now, can borrow that same ordinary magic, the kind that does not solve everything, but keeps the door closed, keeps the breath even, keeps the mind from being swallowed, grain by grain, by the day's leftover sand.